Trapped, yes.
Have you got enough room?
Yeah, I'll do without this actually because I can't see the screen.
Do you want to...
Shall we lift that off? Okay.
There you go. Anyway, welcome.
Hello everybody, good morning. So I'm going to start talking about fibres. Boring. In particular, man-made cellulosic fibres. So even more boring. So maybe I can persuade you otherwise, because I think in your careers are going to be different to people of my generation. Because when I was growing up, many years ago, because I think at my age, the average age is bumped up to over 40, just taking my age into account in this room. You'd look for a job in the back of Draper's Record. And does Draper's Record exist still? Yeah. And you would see adverts for fabric tech, or garment tech, or color development, or designer, and today, you probably just see adverts for this superhuman textile person who has to do all those things. And on top of that now, you may be expected to know things about the environment and sustainability. Because for sure in the future, as Miguel alluded to, if you are from a design background, you're absolutely going to have to take account of environmental issues. And although fibres are way down the supply chain from what you might do, they, along with dyeing and finishing, they probably have the biggest environmental impact by far. And today in denim, well, before in denim, it would just be cotton. You'd only have to learn about cotton. But today, in denim, it could be cotton, it could be tencel, as I will talk about, polyester, elastanes, linens. A fabric might not even contain any cotton at all. It might not even be a woven fabric. So the whole landscape has actually changed. So things that you may think, boring or irrelevant, actually they probably won't be in your lifetime. Sorry, I'm in the way of the things. So that's the fibres landscape, actually. So you have natural fibres or you have man-made fibres. And within man-made fibres, you have things that come from natural polymers, and you things that come from protein-based, and then you have synthetics like polyester, polyamide, that are derived from oil. So what I'm going to talk to you today about are down here, viscose, modal, lyocell. So, not many years ago, a few years ago, I received a phone call from somebody who worked for a jeans brand, whose name I won't mention, a small brand, but based in the West Wales, and they're quite famous. And the guy introduced himself as the technical director. Very important, the director of technology. So he said, can I ask you what Lenzing do? And I said, well, yeah. Basically, we produce fibres from trees. And I said, so just like cotton, we're just making cellulosic fibres. And he said to me, can I stop you there? And I said, what? He said, what's cellulose? Which was a surprise to me coming from a person who describes them as a technical director. But so cellulose is something that you see all around you in nature. Trees, bushes, grass, seaweed is cellulose. And basically, it is made up of carbohydrates. So sugar, so if you take a glucose molecule and you line them up together, that's what is cellulose. So it's basically sugars like glucose. So out of all the fibers there, all the fibers on that chart, they're the ones that that Lenzing, who I work for, make. Viscose, modal, and lyocell. And lyocell we brand as Tencel. So Tencel is a brand name, lyocell is the generic. And cellulose is all around us. So there's a huge amount of cellulose on Earth. And probably about 1% that exists in the world goes into the pulping industry. And out of that 22% of that 1% goes as pulp for the textile fiber industry. And 15% of that 2%, of that 1%, is used by Lenzing. So we're using a very small amount of the available cellulose on Earth. And if you look at where cellulose might come from, cotton is almost 100% cellulose, whereas a tree is probably just under about 50%. We take trees for our fibers. So if you look at man-made cellulosics, there are different processes. The one that's been around the longest is the viscose process, as that's been around for over 100 years. Out of the viscose process, you had a refinement of the process about 40 years ago, and that produced something called modal. Modal is a type of viscose. It's just a better performing viscose, higher strength, higher wet strength. The lyocell process was commercialized in the early 90s, and this was a real revolution in the industry. And it was really designed to replace viscose. So, but when it came into the market, the fibers had so many different properties that actually it became a new generic. So not here by design, really. Cupramonium was a process that was quite dominant through the 60s, but because of environmental reasons, it almost died out. There's only one supplier left in the world, Asahi Corporation in Japan. And acetate process that's a specialist process that's done by a few companies, but it's not something you'll see in denim. So I don't expect you to understand this slide, but you can see the viscose process is on the left and the lyocell process is on the right. So the viscose process is highly complicated, and that whole process probably takes about 24 hours. And one of the issues with cellulose is that it's a very difficult thing to dissolve. I mean, humans can't consume it and break it down. So the viscose process is a process where you have to change the cellulose into something else before you can actually dissolve it. And why do you want to dissolve it? Well, if you're going to form filaments, or filaments then you chop into fibers, you need to have it in liquid form to force it through spinnerets, like a shower head. So you have to change a solid wood into a liquid. So you have to solubilize it. And for more than 100 years, there wasn't really a way to do that. So you had this very complicated process called the viscose process. Whereas the lyocell process here is very simple, because a solvent was found that could directly dissolve cellulose. And in fact, it was technology that hung around for 60-odd years. So a company called Eastman Kodak, you're all too young to probably know who Kodak actually was. Kodak used to make films for cameras. Your mum and dad will explain what that means. So they needed celluloid film, and they had a patent in 1939 that took a certain certain chemical, and it was able to dissolve cellulose. And that patent was taken to use in here. So you have it's a completely simple process. So you have the wood pulp, you add water and solvent, and you make your fiber, and the solvent just stays within the process. It's called a closed loop system. So in your lifetime, you'll hear about closed loop systems. So a very simple process, very neat. And I started working for the invention of this product in 1995. And I used to start talking about its environmental properties and how good it was. And in 1995, nobody gave a stuff about sustainability. So it used to be one apologetic slide at the end of a presentation, and all the designers are packing away and saying, yeah, nobody will pay for it. And now it's probably the first 10 slides of any presentation about the environmental characteristics of Tencel. So how times have changed. So if you look at the amount of fiber in the world that's made, we're just over 100 million tons. And a lot of that is dominated by synthetic fibers. So you have cotton here at the bottom that really hasn't increased in the last 30 years. Here are all the synthetic fibers, mainly polyester, and little old man-made cellulose is here. But with the improvement in sustainability, with the interest in sustainability, suddenly wood-based fibers, man-made cellulose fibers, are growing the fastest per annum now, finally. So there you have it there. So viscose 80 years old, modal 60 years old, lyocell 25 years old. And at 25 years old, that's very young for a fiber. I think it probably took 15 to 20 years before they worked out how even to dye polyester. So there's a long way to go with the understanding of Lenzing, lyocell, and Tencel in this world. So that's the value chain of what the company I work for. So we go from forestry to wood, wood to pulp to fiber, and then from there, many textile applications, or you go into technical applications like non-wovens for wipes. So on the textile side, it goes into many areas, not just denim, so intimate and active and home. On non-wovens, it goes into many different things for wipes, and on what we call industrials, it goes into filtration, it goes into footwear. A lot of the byproducts of our processing are used, for instance, like here. We recover acetic acid from our process, and it goes into foodstuffs. So we have a lot of things that are used or reused or refined. And when you look at how things are assessed in terms of environmental assessments, they call them tiers. So fibers are tier 4. Yarns are tier 3, fabrics are tier 2, finished products, garments are here. And what tends to happen today is that brands and retailers only really bother themselves with here, 1 and 2. So if you see here, this is percentage of US companies about their supply chain mapping. And very few of them actually look back at the impact of fibers in their supply chain. But ironically, this is where a lot of the impacts are coming. So this is a change that's required in our industry, and this is probably an industry that you'll go into and where fibres will become more and more important. And companies like ours, instead of us taking wood, making pulp, making fibres, thank you very much, now we're looking at every part of our business to see what we can make of it. So companies not like ours now are looking into something called biorefinery. So you're looking at all the things that you could do with a tree, or you can do with the processes you're using on the tree. So things like here, these are all products that we now make. So for instance, xylose is a natural sugar that comes from beechwood. So we use beechwood for making modal. We extract and we take and we make something out of xylose, which is a natural sugar. So if you've in mints and in toothpaste, that's the sugars they use. So this is a whole new area of industry for companies like ours in relation to having a more responsible and sustainable business. So in, I think 2010, I was at a conference in New York run by an organization called the Textile Exchange. And they were an organization that came out of an organization called the Organic Exchange, who used to promote organic cotton. And then they started looking at more aspects of the industry. And at the end of the day, they had one of their main speakers get up on stage, Yvon Chouinard, I think his surname is. He's the guy who started Patagonia. And they're kind of one of the leading environmentally responsible brands in the world. And he's a bit of a maverick. I mean, he's in his mid-70s, and he started talking. He outed a secret organization. So a whole load of brands have been meeting in secret in the US to talk about coming up with a new environmental standard, because they were fed up of the fact that there are over 50 certificates and standards that they had to comply with, and it was a nightmare for them, and it was expensive, and they wanted to come up with one overall umbrella standard, and that organization today has morphed into something called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I don't know if you've heard them, SAC, and they've come up with this overall index called the Higg Index. But unfortunately for the guys in the supply chain, that burden has now come down to companies like ours. So that just gives you a snapshot of the things that we're trying to, organizations that we're trying to work with, or certificates that we're trying to attain. And we used to have, our sustainability team used to be one person, now it's about 10 people, and they're still just as busy. If we had 100 people, we'd probably still be very busy. So that's the landscape today. I think we're going through this process where we've expanded to this whole thing, and now I think there's the chance to actually focus down. So with the Sustainable Development Goals, and on back of that, something called science-based targets here. Suddenly, if you're signing up to these things, everything is transparent, everything is online, they can see what you are promising to do, and you're going to be held accountable. Science-based targets are going to be a game changer, because everybody's been making claims about anything, a lot of greenwash. Well, who says this product is responsible? Well, Michael Kininmonth says it is. Michael Kininmonth certification says it. So I think now we're going to get a whole narrowing down, hopefully. But that's the landscape today. And that's the landscape that you're probably going to meet in your lifetime, in your career. And from day to day, this is what we face. We have customer expectations. So we have water issues. We've got Adidas, Puma, Johnson & Johnson asking us for things. Energy CO2 emissions. These are just things recently that they're, CNA, Gap. So every brand has their own targets, and every brand are expecting you to comply with their targets. So it's a mammoth job for any company today. Some of the main companies today and some of the organizations you might meet in your time: Sustainable Apparel Coalition, I talked about. Canopy, particularly interested in forestry. Circular Fibres Initiative, which is an initiative out of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. ZDHC, it deals with chemicals. Textile Exchange, I talked about. Science-Based Targets, World Economic Forum, and it can go on and on and on. And companies like ours, here's our latest 3 developments. 2 of them here, Ecovero and Refibra, are based solely on environmental improvements. So companies are basing a lot of their developments on improving their sustainability. But even if you are not interested during your career, from a private point of view, I think the environment is going to become more important to you, and things that one thing in sustainability that nobody takes account of is the time element. So what was sustainable 5 years ago maybe isn't today, because things have changed. Even problems that weren't around 5 years ago, suddenly they're here and you're having to deal with them. So this is one of them, and hopefully this video will play. You think this is? So the answer could be clothes under my daughter's bed. But that's not the answer. So that was the stomach contents of a dead camel in the Arabian desert. And that was an installation by a photographer. He may be Canadian or American. He's called Chris Jordan. And he'd previously done work back in 2010. So here you have the most remote landfall on Earth, the Midway Atoll, because it's midway between Mexico and Southeast Asia. And he went there and he took a series of photographs, and here are photographs of dead albatross chicks, because their parents feed them with all this stuff here, thinking it's food, and of course it has no value as food, and they starve to death. So this is the most remote island on Earth where these seagulls and these birds are, and they're dying a horrible death. And this was back in 2010. And I know people's consciousness about this thing only really came about with David Attenborough, the Blue Planet. Why is this relevant to textiles? Well, this pollution you can see. Everybody can see it. But the pollution from microfibers nobody sees. So microfibers are textile fibers. And today, they are invading our space. We've all probably got fibers in our guts. Fibers in bottled water that you buy everywhere. So this is a challenge that wasn't here a few years ago. and companies like ours have to react to it. So here you can see that we have certifications for our fibers in terms of biodegradability. So we have certifications to say that our fibers, either in soil or in marine or in water, are guaranteed to break down over a certain time. So who knows what's coming your way in your lifetime? This whole thing about sustainability for me is really invigorating our industry. It's an exciting time, and you have to embrace this, and you have to challenge every claim that you see about product. I've just come back from the Textile Exchange Conference in Vancouver this week, and I would say 50% of what I saw or heard was BS, actually. You need to get educated as best you can in this way, and like somebody said before, all these responsible companies who are speaking today can do that for you, so just ask them. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Mike. Michael, obviously, he's obviously the father of like Tencel, like sort of lifestyle, which is, you know, it's super duper important. And some of the most like sustainable denim that's made right now is using that actual like fiber. Are there any questions? Now this is super important. Are there any questions at all for Michael that anyone has? Okay, I've got the mic, so I'm going to run to you, and then let's do it. Let's go. Go for it.
Hello, hi. I had a question about, this is really loud. With lyocell, I was wondering what kind of wood it uses, and then once the growing demand of this fiber is around, how will that affect the biodiversity?
So, today it's mainly eucalyptus. We do not take wood unknowingly from anything that's not certified. So I think the most famous forestry certification you'll find is FSC. You see it on wood products, on paper products. And that's always been our policy, but we're really being held to account by an organisation called Canopy. If you go online and look for Canopy, they are holding to task, to account, our industry, and they are creating a pathway where people can improve, and they will measure you on that. And so we are at the top of that analysis. They have like a traffic light system, green, amber, red. So there's plenty of our industry in the red area. In terms of diversity, so where we take our eucalyptus from is in South Africa. And the areas that they plant up there are mixed. But at least I'd say 25% of that forestry is never cut down. And they have a whole policy of making sure that they support local economy and biodiversity, and that probably goes for most responsible forestry around the world. And actually, I know people get emotional about chopping trees down, but these forests would not exist without industry. I saw a program many years ago on building houses in the UK, and they were building this big house from oak, and it took 300 trees, and these trees were over 300 years old. But even so, they were grown purposely for this purpose and wouldn't have been grown in the first place. But so there is a lot of responsible forestry that goes on around the world, but still there's a lot of stuff that's, you know, that's naughty. So there are different certifications bodies like FSC, there's PEFC, there's SFI, all looking to certify, and there's organizations like Greenpeace and Canopy who are actually policing it. So I think actually a lot of the trees that we take are from temperate areas. They're not from places like the Amazon. But I'll give you, for instance, we have a competitor until now who has never actually come and marketed themselves at shows. They're based out of Indonesia, and they were at this show this week in Canada, talking about their environmental footprint, but they're not talking about the fact that their parent company has been responsible for bulldozing forests in Indonesia for the last 30 years to grow palm oil. So there's still a lot of that nonsense going on. But if you didn't know that backstory, they're there at this conference this week saying, look how good we are. And young people are there in the audience writing it all down. I'm writing it all down. Well, this looks really good. So actually, you have to be, you have to question, like I said before, you personally have to question all these things. What's behind it? What's the real story?
Okay. One more question. Anyone wants to say? Okay, straight there. I'm going to run over to you.
Hi. I was just wondering, are you interested in hemp? Do you see, like, with the not so much recreationally, but as a business, like with the passing of the Farm Bill, is it going to make a difference if 60% of cellulose of hemp is 60% of hemp is cellulose going forward?
I mean, these are good stories, but well, I'll tell you a parallel story. We were asked to look at nettles. Actually, giant Himalayan nettles for cellulose. I said, oh, okay, yeah, send us a bag. And it arrives, and we looked at it, and it wasn't perfect because you have a lot of stuff in there that's very difficult to get out, and a lot of the plants suck up silica, which is not good for our process. But we looked at it and said, oh, well, this looks okay. But when I went back to ask about this, I said, well, how do you farm these things? And they said, oh, well, it's people, local people do this. They go into the forest and they cut it down. And I said, well, how do they prepare it? Because the outside of the nettle, a bit like hemp, is no good for anything. You have to get rid of the outside. And he said, oh, yeah, they get rid of the outside because they use their teeth to remove it. So can you imagine? Yeah, we'll put an order in for 10,000 tons of that. Yeah. I think the local dentists are going to be really busy, So it's a non-starter, if you know what I mean. And hemp could be a possibility, but it's difficult. And you're in an industry now where you've got this huge price point culture, which has squeezed the life out of the supply chain for the last 30 years. And the supply chain probably could do it, but there's no incentive to do it because it's very difficult to pay back. So there isn't an industry set up to deal with the issues of it. There could be. But the other thing with hemp is you've got very irregular fibers, very long, fat, thin, and it'll always look uneven. So it's never going to look like cotton or whatever. So it always looks rustic and everything else. So it has a place, but in the end, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, and it's not cotton or something else,
One more question from the crowd.
You talked about it taking many years to figure out how to dye polyester. How do you dye a lyocell fibre?
Well, lyocell is cellulose. So all the dyes that were developed for cotton will dye on lyocell, viscose, yes. So in that way, it's very compatible for denim. You take the fibre and you spin it in the same way as cotton, or you spin it with cotton. And you process it on the same machines, and you dye it with the same things. Compatibility is important. As soon as you have a fabric where you have other fibres in there that won't dye with cellulose fibres, it's just an extra process, and. So that brings you back to circularity. You know, should the industry be designing products as much as they can that are based out of one fibre or cellulosics? Probably yes, because recyclability, I haven't even touched on it, but that's another thing to think about.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Okay.
And,
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And now, thank you again. Yeah. Okay. Definitely.